Every year, thousands of indie filmmakers pour their savings, credit cards, and years of their life into a project, and most never see a return. I know this because we've worked with hundreds of filmmakers, heard the horror stories firsthand, and seen what separates the project that quietly work from the ones that collapse under unrealistic expectations. And it's not theory. Everything I'm sharing comes from the real-world experience of my business partner, Mark Klebanoff, an indie producer who has produced 20+ films himself and sold hundreds more globally as a sales agent. He learned these lessons the hard way, and today I'm going to break down the real way indie films make money in 2026. Not the fantasy version, not the film school version, the real version, because most indie films lose money before filming even begins. Not because they're bad films, but because they were built on the wrong assumptions. A lot of filmmakers believe success means get into Sundance, land Netflix, sell for millions, get a theatrical release, become the next breakout story. But for the vast majority of indie films, that's not how money is made. The real path is usually slower, less glamorous, and far more strategic. And if you're trying to make this work later in life or after years of waiting, wasting 2 more years on the wrong model gets expensive. So let's start with the first mistake. If you want your film to make money, you have to stop guessing your budget. So let me explain what I mean here. I know you've hired a line producer and you've come up with a budget that seems reasonable for your film, right? But as we all know, 3 different line producers can give you 3 different budgets for the same film. And most films can go lower budget or higher budget. More often than not, it's a choice. So a lot of filmmakers start with what they've decided to spend instead of what the market can realistically return. And that's where they encounter problems. You see, your budget isn't just a creative decision, it's a business decision. It should be based on realistic projections and actual market conditions, not what you want to spend or what your line producer said. Because we've seen filmmakers spend $2 million on a film when the market only values it at $1 million. And that's a devastating gap that can destroy a project before release even happens. So this is a place where regional incentives can help. Tax credits and rebates can dramatically lower your risk by giving back 20 or 30% of your budget of qualified spend, but only if you plan for them up front. If you don't take advantage of one, you're not just missing an opportunity, you're increasing your risk before cameras even roll. And risk, that is one of the most important things to keep in mind as a producer. You're in charge of the finance, you're responsible for other people's money. You want to do everything you can to make sure your film is set up to be a good investment. I mean, if someone presented an offer to you and said, hey, invest in this car for 10K, it could sell for 20 to the right buyer, but right now the market value is 7. Would you buy the car? No, right? But we hear that all the time with films. This one's gonna be the next Blair Witch or Paranormal Activity or Terrifier. Yes, it could, but what is the actual, real, current market value? So in the event that it doesn't hit the jackpot, you still know you're covered. Now, this isn't about dashing anyone's dreams. It's about standing in reality and making decisions practically with the information at hand instead of missing bits and pieces that can have a huge impact on your film. But here's another thing to keep in mind. Even if you budget correctly, filmmakers still have some big misconceptions and expectations. A lot of them assume theatrical is where the money is, and usually it's not. First of all, indie films do not need a theatrical release to be successful. And for most indie films, theatrical does not generate significant revenue. It's a marketing event at best, and often an expensive one. Unless you're a major studio film, have a franchise, or have serious built-in demand, theatrical release usually doesn't make financial sense. But many filmmakers still chase it. They can see the packed theaters, the reviews, the prestige, momentum, and while it's possible, it's not the norm. It can be difficult to get enough word of mouth or launch targeted marketing that actually gets butts in seats. In many cases, indie theatrical runs lose money and create little long-term benefits. Does it feel good to have a theatrical release? Yes. Does it actually generate revenue? So I did the math. Even if you fill a theater, once you factor in rental costs and marketing, there's often very little left, or at best you break even. So theatrical release can be useful as a part of a targeted distribution strategy, but it's not for every film and can often end up losing money. So if that's not how films make money, what actually is? Well, it comes down to 3 things: building a film the market can support, structuring it to recoup over time, and releasing it in a way that maximizes long-term visibility. And everything we're talking about today fits into those 3 levers. Most filmmakers think in terms of one film, one big break, one lucky hit, but the filmmakers who actually build careers think differently. They think in systems. They think long-term. They improve their decisions earlier in the process. Because by the time you're on set, many of the biggest decisions are already locked in. A sustainable career in indie film usually isn't built on one miracle moment. It's built on making smarter films, smarter deals, and doing it again and again. A lot of filmmakers think the secret is knowing what Netflix pays or what Amazon pays or what AVOD pays per view, but those numbers alone won't save a bad business model. Every film is different. Every deal is negotiated differently. Every release path is different. The real way films make money isn't memorizing payout numbers. It's building a film the market can support. What matters more is building a film whose budget, positioning, and strategy actually fit the market. That's universal. That's what can be planned. That's what successful producers focus on. And that's exactly why we created the Creative Producers Filmmaking Roadmap Masterclass. Because most filmmakers never got taught how successful producers actually evaluate a project before they spend money. And then they try to figure this out through advice from panels or outdated information or trial and error, which gets very expensive and can take a long time. If you want to know the strategies successful producers use to fast track the green light and make content consistently, while avoiding expensive mistakes before the money is spent, our masterclass is linked below. It's free, and it breaks down how real projects get positioned for funding and lucrative distribution. So if you want that training, go grab it now. So now let's dig more into distribution, because that's where you'll see a return. Years ago, you could get significant MGs or minimum guarantees to start paying back your investors right away. But nowadays, most films do not make a significant amount of money back immediately. Sometimes it takes years. It's not a bad thing per se, it's just the reality of the current market. Distribution today looks very different than it used to. Years ago, in the days of DVDs, Blu-rays, cable licenses, upfront guarantees were more common. Today, many deals are performance-based, revenue share, meaning the film has to perform over time. And because the market is crowded, you're not just competing with films anymore, you're competing with YouTube, TikTok, games, social media. Everything is fighting for attention, which means visibility matters more than ever, and recoupment for most films is over time. So I like to explain it to investors like rental income. Most investors understand real estate. This model is similar to that in the sense that a large money goes in up front, returns come back a little bit over time, but then the returns continue forever. So some films recoup in 18 months, some take 5 years, some take longer. That's why budget matters so much. If you build the film upside down, basically, where the budget is more than the film is worth, you may never hit profitability. So why did the market shift? Streaming. The lucrative days of DVDs are gone. We are now in relatively uncharted waters with streaming, where distributors don't have as clear of a path to revenue, which is why MGs are getting harder to obtain. They're still there, but it's more difficult. But streaming is gaining ground and is turning into the most lucrative stream of revenue for indie films. And when I say streaming, the more technical terms are VOD and AVOD, and that means rentals, purchases, and ad-based platforms. Streaming can be profitable, but again, only if the film is packaged, positioned, and released intelligently. It only works if everything before it was set up properly. And unlike theatrical, where everything depends on one opening weekend, streaming generates revenue gradually over time. And so many filmmakers say then, well, why don't I just self-distribute and take all the money? They don't want to pay the 20% to the sales agent to get on the streamers. They think they can do better by eliminating the middleman. Now, in some cases, self-distribution may be the only option, but many filmmakers misunderstand self-distribution. On paper, it sounds great. You keep 100% of the revenue, but 100% of what? Without infrastructure, without relationships, without reach, many films get put on a platform, but don't get seen. So an aggregator, sure, it'll put your film on a platform, that's it. Distribution professionals, however, have relationships with platforms. They can get better placement in the queue so they can help your film get seen. And visibility is what drives revenue on these platforms. So sometimes having a smaller piece of a much larger pie is better than owning all of a tiny one. And that's why the right distribution partner can matter so much. Not all are good, you need to be careful, but the right one can expand the size of the opportunity. And if your film is positioned well, it can make money forever. My business partner and indie producer, Mark Klebanov, has films that are still paying quarterly years later through streaming and AVOD. One of his own films, The Morning, was made at a low six-figure budget over a decade ago. So this was pre-streaming, and back then you delivered a film and it had a release, and then revenue stopped after a period of time. So the revenue had stopped on this film, and then streaming became available and he released it on AVOD, and it opened the life of the film again. Now it still delivers income every quarter, years later. And that's how most indie films really work. Not one giant payday, long tail revenue, smart ownership, and patience. And this is why lower budget films often have an advantage. They have less to recoup, which means a niche audience, solid execution, and proper distribution can create real upside. Mark often talks about the low-budget film Girl Lost that he took on as a sales agent and then became an executive producer on for the sequel. So this film didn't make anyone rich overnight, but relative to films in its budget range, it dramatically outperformed. Millions of views, strong long-tail performance. And it did so well, they made a sequel and are now working on the third. So this is a legitimate success story, not because it was a miracle, but because it worked inside reality. Now compare that to what happens when expectations are wrong. Mark recently shared the story of a producer he met at AFM. So the producer spent $2 million and Mark ran the numbers on the film, and the numbers valued the film lower than the budget at something like a $700K discrepancy. The producer refused to accept the offer. He needed $2 million and believed a bigger deal was coming. But you can't wish the numbers into becoming what you need. The numbers are validated by the market and they don't change. So years later, Mark ran into someone who worked on the film and discovered that the film still hadn't been properly released. He was still holding out for that impossible number. But while he waited, the film got older and less valuable. And that happens more than people think. Sometimes the biggest loss isn't a bad deal. It's refusing reality long enough that the opportunity disappears. So in these days of streaming and less upfront returns, you need to be strategic. You need to have proper expectations and build something that might be profitable in the real marketplace. The people who last in indie film don't chase one lucky hit. They learn how the game actually works. Making money in indie film isn't about chasing one lucky break. It's about learning how the business actually works. So you can make smarter decisions, avoid expensive mistakes, and keep creating over the long term. Because the people who last in this industry don't just make one film. They learn how to get films made again and again. So if you're serious about finally getting your film made and building a real future in this business, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Here at this channel, we talk about the real side of funding, distribution, producing, and how to build a sustainable career making films. And if you've got a question or a project you're working through, drop it in the comments. We look at every one. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.